All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for attending the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association's 36th Sustainable Agriculture Conference. You have joined the session Building Resilience and Climate Adaptation with Community Seed Selection, presented by Chris Smith, who is the Executive Director of the Utopian Seed Project. My name is Angie Lavezzo, and I am CFSA's Communications Coordinator and will be the workshop host. Feel free to introduce yourself and put your questions throughout the workshop in the chat. Please remember our conference community agreements and keep them in mind when you engage in chat or participate in group discussions. Chris has asked to leave most questions towards the end of his presentation, so I think it's still a good idea to kind of put them in the chat as they come up. That way, if there are any really clarifying questions, I can get him to iron those out for us before we get to the end. But otherwise, we'll save them for the end. I'd like to give a big thank you to our session sponsor, So True Seed. They're in Asheville, North Carolina, a great seed company. Please check them out under the sponsors page or visit them at the trade show for more information. And now I'm going to hand it over to Chris and I'll let him get going.
Hey all, I'm going to jump straight into my presentation and let you know a little bit more about the Utopian Seed Project and what we're up to, and launch straight into some of this pretty exciting topic that I got to share with you today. So give me 1 second. Okay, so as Angie said, we are going to be talking about building resilience and climate adaptation with community seed selection. This is a pretty big topic to cover in our time frame. So what I'm hoping to do is just give you an overview of some of the concepts that we are working on ourselves, share some kind of resources and ideas on how you as farmers and growers could get involved with some of this work, and then finish up with a specific project that we launched this last year, which was a community seed selection project that engaged a wide group of people to help select seed towards a given goal as a big group across all of America, actually, even though we're concentrated in the South. So that's a quick overview of what we're doing. Angie said that I'm the executive director of the Utopian Seed Project. We're a fairly new nonprofit, so you may not have come across what we're up to. We're based just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and at our core, we're doing crop and variety trials to explore diversity in food and farming, and that ends up looking like some of the panels on the screen you see in front of you. A lot of them are integrated and overlapping, and the topic that we're going to talk about today kind of covers a lot of what we're up to. So it's pretty exciting to share some of our work with you and hopefully inspire some of you to get involved with what we're doing. So if you're interested in more about the project, then we can connect in social media and websites and all that sort of stuff, and hopefully can kind of build that relationship together going forward. And then just a quick little bit about me. I was working for So True Seed, so it's exciting to see that they've sponsored this session for about 7 years before starting this project. And during that time, I kind of, as a British person, fell in love with okra and ended up teaching classes and writing a book about it. And just actually, I'm still crazy about okra and still doing a lot of work with okra. And the community seed selection project that I'm about to share with you is an okra one. So, there's going to be some okra coming up here, but it's not all about okra. And I like to begin with this quote, because even though we're going to talk more about on-farm diversity and crop diversity and those types of things, I think being aware as a consumer of food that diversity is important in our diets and in the way that we address the way we interact with food is also important. And this quote always kind of brings it home to me that we're very wasteful as food consumers. And this was written in the 1970s, but basically it says the desirability of cultivating multiple purpose crops cannot be overemphasized. For crops that can produce several kinds of useful products make efficient use of land. The pressure imposed by expanding populations and higher standards of living will force us to produce food, feed, forage, fiber, foliage, and fuel on increasingly limited land resources. So even though that was written almost 50 years ago now, it still feels like a slap in the face in terms of what we need to do and where we need to go with not just our food systems, but everything about us as consumers. And for me, okra speaks strongly to that, in that we can relook at okra and find lots of different ways to use that crop, but it applies to all sorts of other crops too. So a lot of this kind of like seed to stem philosophy was part of the foundation work of the Utopian Seed Project. And so as we're exploring different crops in our region and different varieties, then we can also be looking at different ways to kind of like diversify our income streams as farmers to get these crops into different hands to do different things, and hopefully have a more interesting and diverse and exciting foodscape for us all to kind of experience. Okay, so that's just a little bit about our background, but let's jump into the actual meat of today. If it all comes down to diversity, then what's that really mean in a real sense? And we're lucky to have some pretty great academics working on this. And Janet McFall actually wrote a paper called "Toward Resilient Food Systems Through Increased Agricultural Diversity and Local Sourcing" in the Carolinas. So you can. Oh, I should let you know, right at the end of this presentation, I've got a link that links back to all of these slides. So you can just save that one link and get access to all these slides. So any hyperlinks within this presentation and references to articles, then you can go back and look up. So if you're interested in reading this full paper, it's available online and you can come back and check it out. But one she was talking about specifically Carolinas, which makes it an interesting paper, but she breaks down what we mean by diversity within the food system. And she talks about this, genetic diversity within certain cultivars, so like lots of different varieties that we can grow, which we'll look at briefly. And then species diversity, so looking at actual different crops that we can grow, not just different varieties within those crops. And then she also talks about this kind of ecosystem diversity. So not every farm, even if each farm is diversified, not every diversified farm needs to look the same. So just lots and lots of different ways to do things in terms of growing food can give us a level of resiliency. So to kind of break this down a little bit, the variety diversity, I feel like this is one of maybe the low-hanging fruits. There are a lot of varieties out there. There's some great seed companies, and it's relatively easy to access a broad diversity of varieties. Now, some of them are packaged for the home gardener, so as you get towards bulk seeds for farmers, then those variety options may be narrow somewhat, and then within given systems, then it narrows even more. So you may have to shop around a little bit, but I think as a farmer, you can think beyond Clemson Spineless and Red Burgundy when it comes to okra, and Covington and Beauregard when it comes to sweet potatoes and that kind of thing. You can kind of broaden your horizons. And I'm probably speaking to the converted here, and a lot of you are already probably got pretty interesting mixes on your farms. This is actually 60 different varieties of okra that I did in one of my first big okra trials. So every pod is from a different variety, and I think it's really beautiful to see the diversity that does exist. And it's often shocking to consumers and some growers and farmers that this number of varieties are freely available in the market. I'm part of a kind of a collaborative effort called the Heirloom Collard Project, and it's kind of a similar idea to what I've done with okra. It's exploring varietal diversity. It's trying to encourage more people to be seed stewards. It's looking at the culinary and the cultural and the historical aspects of some of these foods, and then trying to kind of elevate or uplift the food system to embrace some of the diversity within these crops that we already grow. The Utopian Seed Project is focused on traditional southern crops and exploring varietal diversity within those. And so collards, okra, sweet potatoes, southern peas, these are all kind of within our wheelhouse, where we're just trying to really celebrate and enjoy all the differences that currently exist within the food system without needing to do any breeding work. They're just out there. They're just not necessarily grown as widely as they maybe should be. So this is just some beautiful collard diversity. We'll come back to the heirloom collard project because that's kind of the second community seed selection project we've launched. So I'll talk about more of that at the end. I wanted to throw this one in here because we're going to talk about it again. These are dahlias, but we did a big project where we grew 62 different dahlias from seed to do actually a culinary assessment of the roots. But again, just as soon as you start growing lots and lots of different diverse varieties, then the beautiful differences of all those different plants, even though it's the same species, come out. And I think it's just really fun to grow. And certainly if you're a smaller or market farmer or even CSA farmer, to be able to really offer something different at market or even something potentially unique when it comes to things like seed grown dahlias, then there's a really good narrative to tell there, and that can play into marketing pretty easy to kind of make you stand out from the crowd, I guess. And then another just diversity variety shot. I'm lucky one of my board members is Jana Fishman, which some of you may know, and she curates, I think, over 100 varieties of sweet potatoes and has done for quite some time. And so we've been slowly growing through her collection and just starting to document some of those differences and get some photographs, and the culinary evaluations are very important to us. So it's pretty exciting when you put them all together and start seeing what's on offer, and then the flavors really are fantastic. It's not always, we've got Covington in here, but Covington's kind of like a super sweet, like we get the super sweet corns, but in terms of complexity of flavors, then once you start digging into some of the other ones, then there's a lot on offer. Okay, so variety diversity is important, and I think it's worth recognizing that, you know, if we were to achieve maximum varietal diversity, then maybe we'd plant, like, if we had a row of, let's stick with okra, if we had a row of okra, then, and we wanted 50 plants of okra, then if we grew 50 different varieties, then we'd be maximizing diversity in okra. That's not what I'm suggesting for a farm system, although in a home garden system, you can kind of do whatever you want and have as much different things as you have space for. But in a farm system, what we're balancing some need for some level of uniformity, or at least efficiencies, in terms of having things maybe ready in more or less the same time, harvestable in some level of efficient manner, and that kind of things. And this changes, like you're going to fall on one side of a coin. Maybe you're hand harvesting everything and your tolerance for non-uniformity and diversity is very high. If you're machine harvesting, then your tolerance becomes much lower because things need to be more uniform. And that's where we see, as farms get bigger and we go towards industrial monocropped agriculture, then it becomes extremely important for everything to be extremely uniform, and that pushes us in a certain direction in terms of needing uniform F1 hybrids and that type of thing. But as we get more towards the smaller scale, small scale farming doesn't need to be a small version of the big farms. Small farms can redefine themselves to be whatever they want because they're operating with different parameters. And certainly once you get into hand harvesting things, then I think a lot of those constraints that maybe F1s or larger scale forces is into don't exist, and you can adopt much greater diversity on your farm if you're hand harvesting. So that's just something to consider yourselves. But that balance of like how much diversity is a personal question to ask, but one interesting answer to it is land races. Now, the term land race, I feel, is kind of like being thrown around quite a lot these days and becoming something that's talked about and maybe not fully understood. And as with when it comes to just words and semantics, then, you know, people use it for their own. Like traditionally, land races feel to me like they're connected to culture in a deeper way, and a fairly diverse population of plants from a given crop exist and are selected over time, but they're not like narrowed down to be like a specific tight variety. And so we see a lot of genetic variance within that population that allows them to be fairly robust and resilient over time. So in our current climate of rapidly changing or unpredictable weather systems, then land races become quite appealing. You can see these are two quotes from Joseph Lofthouse, who this year published Landrace Gardening as a book, which is a very interesting read. It lays down how Joseph Lofthouse, in a hard to grow environment, has managed to adapt a lot of crops to be very productive and very tasty in his environment. And I think a lot of the lessons that he talks about can be applied elsewhere. But I like that he says landrace gardening offers food security through biodiversity. And then down below, landraces are loved for producing stable yields under changing growing conditions. And that concept of stable yields over maximized yields is something that I think will become more appealing over time, because maximized yields kind of rely on stable conditions. But if we've got unstable conditions and we still want stable yields, then I don't think it matters if we're getting like the absolute optimum yield that you can get from a crop, as long as we're getting, a satisfactory yield from some of our harvest. So it's a slightly different way of thinking. And I really feel like it's quite appealing as we move forward. And it follows on from this idea of varietal diversity. Means that if we've got multiple varieties on the farm or within a given food system, then we've got this concept of resilience, because maybe one variety gets felled due to pest pressure or a fungal disease, but another one has some natural protection and survives. That if we only planted one crop and the whole thing got taken out, then it's a wash. But if we've got a few different varieties of that same crop and some do better in some conditions, then we're kind of like hedging our bets and evening it out across the whole board. But this concept of land races takes that like all the way and says, well, let's not even plant lots of different varieties. Let's just have like one diverse population of corn or squash. And within that population, there's enough genetic diversity to one, deal with whatever's thrown at it within a given year, so we get this stable yield. But the other really appealing thing about these land races is, because of that genetic diversity within that population, then there's quite a high flexibility and ability for them to change year on year on year. There's this idea of adaptation happens very quickly. And one thing that struck me from reading Joseph Lofthouse's book is he talks about how modern agriculture takes a uniform variety of something and aims to change the environment to suit that variety. So we use irrigation and pesticides and fertilizers to try and make that variety happy wherever we're trying to grow it. And he says that's the wrong way around. We should be flipping it around and saying it's much easier to get the plant to change the environment than it is to continuously be adapting the environment to suit the plant. And so when we have this really broad genetic diversity and we select seeds from the best performing varieties over a couple of years, then he has experienced very rapid adaptation of those plants to his challenging environment. And the South is a challenging place to grow. We have high humidity, we have late season rainfalls. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There's a lot of pests. And again, it's very appealing to think that if we just stepped towards much broader genetic diversity in our crops and did some selective seed saving on those crops, then we could be creating robust plant populations that can survive and adapt in our changing conditions. So Landrace gardening, it is a whole presentation book in itself, but that's kind of like the concept behind it, and I think it's well worth thinking about. And we'll come back to this idea again a little bit later as we get into the specifics of community seed selection. Okay, so another quick quote just to kind of ram home this point of like diversity and resilience going hand in hand. The Crop Trust writes, ensuring food security, adapting to climate change, reducing environmental degradation, protecting nutritional security, reducing poverty, and ensuring sustainable agriculture are just 6 reasons why it matters to conserve crop diversity. There's a link there if you want to delve deeper into that article, but that's your summary statement. And then, okay, so that's my lead in for talking about crop diversity. We talked about variety diversity leading into land races, but that's all diversity within a given species, like within okra, within corn, within squash. We can also look at crop diversity, so different crops on a farm. And when I think about crop diversity, I like to think about it within the idea of plant families. And I feel like certainly with us all being in fall gardening mode at the moment, if we were to look out on our farms and look what is growing, I bet there's a lot of the Brassicaceae family represented. And so here's just a nice tree that shows that even when we think we're fairly diverse, within the realm of plant families, we're probably not. And you see this in the supermarket too. You see your broccoli, your Brussels sprouts, your kohlrabi, your cabbage, your cauliflower, collards, kale. You see all of them on the shelf and go, wow, look at all this different food. But when you look at this tree, you realize all those different foods are actually not even within the same family, not even within the same genus. They're all the same plant species. So genetically, there's not a lot of diversity because it's the identical species that is being bred in different directions. Kind of amazing plant breeding work, but not representing a lot of botanical diversity. And then if you step back from that species level and look at Brassica rapa, Brassica juncea, Brassica napus, we've radish, arugula, we've got nasturtium over here. Like all these things are within the Brassicaceae family. So it's a really big family that represents a lot of the food that we consume, but it makes it fairly narrow in genetic diversity because they're all of the same plant family. We see the same with the Solanaceae family. It covers potatoes, eggplants, peppers, tomatoes, tobacco, all within one family. So yes, there's lots of diversity within that family, but it's still the same plant family. So when I think about how do we incorporate diversity between crops, then stepping back to the family level lets me think, okay, what else can we bring into these food systems that's really going to give us a different option, whether it's within our crop rotations or within pest predation that focuses on a certain plant family or potentially plant genus. So that's the concept here. I would definitely encourage you just to step back and look at your fields and go, well, what is in my field right now and how diverse is it really? And then some of the work of the Utopian Sea project is to look at crop options that could work in this realm. So I don't like using the word new crops, but certainly new for this region. A lot of the crops we're working with have like long histories in other regions, but here they've not as well grown. Turmeric is relatively new to this region, but more and more people are growing it now, and it's exciting to see this being incorporated and seen all over the place. It still feels like a lot of people, now know how to grow turmeric, but it all seems to be imported from Hawaii these days, and everyone's got the same source, and so we're losing diversity within turmeric. But it's nice to bring in another crop option. We're working with a bunch of different varieties. We have this beautiful green turmeric, the black turmeric, and then the oranges and the reds. There's diversity within it. So again, even once you find a new crop option, within that crop option, there's still going to be wonderful diversity to explore. We're very excited about taro as an edible source. This kind of leans a little bit on some of the climate adaptation stuff we're looking at in terms of different crops, assuming, and a strong assumption, it's going to be warmer in the future with our climate change issues. Excuse me. Then we're looking at starchy, storable crops that can be stored over winter and produce in abundance in a warming climate, as things like the traditional potato might become harder and harder to grow or require more and more externalized inputs. Things like taro are a traditional tropical crop across the world that so far in our growing haven't suffered from many pests or diseases, are very productive and delicious. They're just not known within the food system. So there's some front end consumer work to be done to get these more accepted. But our early results are that it's highly productive, very delicious, stores very well. Like, it's got all the things that are needed to be successful in the food system once consumers get on board with eating it. This is chayote. We've got a few farmers in the region now that are really liking chayote. It doesn't get the same, it's a squash, but it doesn't get the same predation on the leaves. It doesn't seem to suffer from downy and powdery mildew in the same way, and it's a late season crop. So this is something that can, kind of like a winter squash, be taken into the winter season. And then we've got some other root crops that are less well known. This one is a chira. It's another starchy root crop. It can be eaten raw. It can be sliced and fried. It can be baked. You can extract a flour or a starch from it. So it's kind of a cool crop. Its Latin name is Canna edulis, and you might know that from the canna lilies. Above ground, it looks very similar, but below ground, it forms these large rhizomes, and they can get really big. So when we dig these, I don't even know the weight, but there's a lot of biomass underground that is all edible, which is pretty exciting. And you could grow this as a landscaping crop. It's just so beautiful above ground. And then the last one, we're working with a lot of what we think of as experimental crops in this region to see if they can work. I'm just sharing some of the ones that are a little more hopeful at this point in terms of their ease of growth and production and that kind of thing. This is yacon, or Bolivian sunroot, and we like this one because it's a real sweet, crunchy, delicious tuber. People that have tried it get very excited about it. The English call it ground apple because it's kind of sweet and crunchy like an apple. It's kind of, a chef described it to me recently. What did he say? He was like, it's everything that jicama wants to be. And that's probably offensive to some people, so I apologize. But that was a quote that kind of like, yes, it's just this really delicious, super tasty root crop that grows really well in this region. So these last few pictures have just been to encourage you to like think outside the box, think outside of the plant families. And so some of this, you can take inspiration from the work that we're doing. That's our whole aim, is to try and inspire people to take on different crops. But we're trying to work to see if they can be grown in this region, and then can they be productive, and then start encouraging consumers and farmers to engage with them as new crops on their farms. And then this is something I came across very recently. It's just another way to kind of show you that this question of biodiversity, agrobiodiversity, that feels like it's been ignored in recent industrial food and farming systems, is coming more and more to the foreground. More people are writing about it. There's lots of really good academic articles as well as journalistic articles. And I came across this one recently. There's a link that you can go back to and read more about it. But this is a collection of essays, and they intro it by saying the evidence is mounting that agricultural biodiversity is vital for supporting human food sovereignty, food security, and nutrition. Biodiversity-rich agriculture has proven able to provide a stable, diversified, and nutrient-rich supply of food for farmers and their communities, while supporting ecological functions important for resilient and sustainable food production and the sustenance of complex ecosystems. So big claims there, but I think it's becoming more obvious that kind of big ag is failing us on multiple levels beyond just growing food in terms of food justice and food access, food nutrition, and environmental concerns all over the place as well. And when we look at like what does a different food system look like, and we try and approach this with a lens of decolonization, then these regional biodiverse food systems can be a way to combat a lot of these much bigger complex problems. Okay, so that's laying some of the groundwork of, resilience can be achieved through embracing biodiversity. The question then becomes, as a farmer or a grower, how can I engage with this work? And so I just want to give a few examples of easy ways for you to jump into it, and then we'll finish with this community seed selection project that we've specifically been running ourselves this year. Okay, so variety trials are one of the easiest ways, I feel, to engage. Sometimes there's maybe like a hesitation around like, can I really do a variety trial when farming is hard work and everything's busy, and you're asking me now to do variety trials? And the front cover of this book is like, this is not the cover I would have chosen because everyone's standing there with notepads. And I feel like variety trials can be quite simple and anecdotal. You're not going to publish a paper off the back of your variety trial, but you can still get meaningful data by following a few basic guidelines so that the information is meaningful and useful to you, or reliable to you, without it needing to be massively complex. So we're not going to go deep into how to set up variety trials, but this link here is the Organic Seed Alliance's guide to conducting on-farm variety trials, and it's a free PDF download, and it's a very short booklet that's very accessible and gives you some really good ideas on how you can do variety trials, just to test out a few different things. And ways that I would encourage you to go is find a couple of local varieties or varieties that have been bred for southern systems, and just find a couple of new varieties and plant them with the thing that and compare them. Just compare and contrast, and you may be surprised by what's out there. Edmund Frost, who has taught at this conference before, has been working on a disease-resistant productive butternut, which is a cross between a Seminole and a Waltham butternut. And we've grown it the last couple of years, and it's insanely productive. It's not uniform. The fruits all over the place in terms of uniformity, but it doesn't get felled by diseases. I've still got a vine in my garden that's putting out flowers and producing today, and we've had 3 light frosts here, and it's still pumping out flowers. It's probably going to die tonight, to be honest, but it's very productive. And just being open-minded to try some of those in your systems could really help you bring on varieties that are new and useful. And then the other aspect of this, if setting up your own trial is too intimidating, actually at the CFSA conference, when it used to be in person, Janine Davis often has a table, and the very last conference she was getting people to sign up to be part of a participatory trialing process. She had funds to pay farmers to be trialing certain things in the field, and Janine was actually there with her team as backup and support for that trial, so you can be part of a bigger trial on your farm. And again, it's a way to start bringing in a little bit of research onto the farm to change ideas and broaden horizons in terms of what you're growing. So variety trials, I think, are pretty low-hanging fruit to just do small ones on your farm. Another option, which I like because it can be tied to an income as well, is you can be a seed grower or a trialer, and a lot of seed companies will allow farmers to come in at quite an entry level when it comes to seed saving. when I used to work for So True Seed, then we'd get new farmers wanting to grow seed, or new seed growers wanting to grow seed for us. And we would just pair them up with a small grow out of an easy to save crop like a bean or a tomato in the first year, and just guide them through that process before giving them like a large, more difficult seed saving crop going forward. So farmers would kind of get categorized into beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and we'd match the seed crop up with the farmer. And so there's a lot of smaller southern and east coast seed companies that are looking to grow farmer seed growing contracts. They'll give their own advice on like the seed selection process. So there can be an educational component to this too, of like, we don't want all the corn varieties that lodge, don't save seeds from them. But we want you to save a smaller population of the varieties that produce 2 cobs per stalk, because we're going to start developing that to be a high yielding variety. And that's work you can do directly with a seed company, often under contract, so that at the end of the season, the seed company will buy the seed off you, and you've got an income there as well. So we've actually got a Southeast seed growing intensive happening on Monday the 15th through CFSA, and I think you can still sign up for it. So we're in Asheville, so you have to come to Asheville. But there's a grant funded scholarship there that's available to most people, which makes it only $20 to attend. So I'd encourage you, if you're in or near the region and you're interested in the seed growing aspect of all of this, to come to that event. We've got some great speakers. So yeah, don't be intimidated by seed growing. It's easy and it's accessible, and seed companies are supportive and wanting to get more farmers involved. And then this is an example of some projects that exist out there. If you I stumbled across this on social media, but some Cultivariable is a company that's developing plant varieties, and they had a participatory plant breeding project where they were doing all the breeding, and then they just wanted people to grow out the seed from their crosses and make some basic observations. So they sent a packet of dahlia seeds. We grew out 60 different plants, and then he wanted to know about yield, so we dug them up at a certain date and weighed them, and then we did a culinary evaluation because he wanted the best tasting tubers to go back to him. So it was really fun to like be under his umbrella, because he'd done the hard work of the crosses and that kind of stuff, and we were just growing something that was beautifully diverse in the field and gave us access to something new. So that was kind of exciting to me to be a part of that, and I see those opportunities cropping up in the online world. It's just some data that we took from the taste test. And then finally, on this idea of like how you can kind of engage in this, one trend that I've started seeing recently, or maybe I've just become more aware of it, is more seed companies seem to be offering either, they describe them as like breeders mixes. Sometimes they describe them as land races. Experimental Farm Network is doing this, where they're sending out seeds that's either been crossed, so like lots of different varieties that have all crossed with each other, or seeds that are inherently unstable. They're not like a stable variety. And they're saying, this is showing us some cool opportunities. Take these seeds that, are going to produce unpredictable results, but they'll produce something. And you can then direct this population of plants in whatever direction you want to go. And that's kind of, an exciting place to be. And again, I think it can tie into small farmers' narrative of, we've taken this broad mix of genetics and guided it towards something that either suits our particular customer base or suits our own individual agronomic needs on the farm and those types of things. This is Edmund's squash, the South Anna butternut, and you can see there's a lot of different squash shapes. And maybe your customers really want the long neck, or maybe they like the super massive ones and they're really into that, or maybe they want really baby ones. This one packet of seeds will throw out all of those things, and then you can save seeds from the squash fruit that suit your particular customers and guide it to effectively be your own variety. We've done similar things with the okra over here, and I'm just seeing more and more of those kind of opportunities cropping up from the seed companies to someone else has already done that work of mixing and crossing and creating the mix, and then you're just getting the seeds and being able to explore what's within that. It can be very exciting and lead to some really good discoveries. And so on the back of that, one thing that's kind of occurred to me is, this is actually a quote from Seedlinked, which is a kind of a crowdsourced online trialing platform that's worth checking out. But this particular quote that I've highlighted really kind of stood out to me. Increased availability and use of diverse seed would create more diversity in agricultural landscapes, contributing to breeding ecosystems that could evolve much quicker in the face of climate change. So this concept of breeding ecosystems is very different to our traditional idea of like a breeding pipeline, where somewhere somebody decides they're going to make some cross for some end goal, and they do the cross, and then they do the selections, and then at some point they release the variety, and then we all get excited about it and buy that new variety that's been bred in Washington and grown in Washington, and then try and grow it in the South, and it doesn't perform as well as we hoped it would. And it's all very linear and not very inclusive. And I feel like this idea of a breeding ecosystem could be really, really awesome to encourage in the South, where if we've got lots of different decentralized projects going on and into sharing of seeds towards the common goal of, diversity, culinary excellence, pest pressure, yields, like all the things that we want in our food system, could be happening right here in a small, low budget way that currently isn't really happening on any scale. But I love the idea of encouraging a breeding ecosystem. And so that kind of leads us to this project that we launched this year, which is a community seed selection project. And a lot of this is based or grew out of everything I've told you so far in this presentation. It's like this desire to encourage greater biodiversity, explore varietal diversity as well as crop diversity, but then not be doing it in a vacuum or on our own, and wanting to do it quickly enough that we can have meaningful change in terms of rapidly changing climates. So there's a lot of things that came together to this community seed selection project, and this specific project, and I'll talk you through it, doesn't really have like climate adaptation goals or anything like that. But the lessons that we've all learned through going through the process, I think, has given people the tools to do their own seed selection work and have that kind of breeding ecosystem thing naturally grow out of this type of project. And then as we get into community seed selection 201 type of thing, then we can change our goals for that seed selection to embrace climate adaptation a little more thoroughly. So quickly, this Whidby White was a variety that I got from Seed Savers Exchange, and they basically had mixed up genetics, whereas it was meant to be this white pod, and they were getting a whole bunch of other pods. And so it started off as a simple restoration project where they were like, Chris, can you just grow this variety, select out the white ones, get rid of the green ones, and then return us a true Whidby White seed instead of this messed up, accidentally cross-pollinated variety. So we started that. Actually, Angie, the host from the beginning, was my first farm that let me grow a small population of this. And we made our selections. You can see these were the whitest ones at the top. There was one very white one and then some pales. And we did simple selection for the whites. But there seemed to be more, it seemed to be more messed up than Seed Savers had told me about. Grew it again in 2019, a slightly larger population. A little more uniformity because I'd made some initial selections, but still a lot of greens. 2020, I managed to do a much bigger planting. I had great uniformity on things like height and production, but I was still getting this wide range of colors. You can see the top row were my pales, so I was definitely getting paler, but there was still plenty of greens in there. Every year I would cut out all the green plants and I let the pale plants cross-pollinate and then save the seeds from that. 2020, because I did such a big population, I was able to cull very harshly. So I took out a lot of the off-type plants. I was very aggressive or ruthless. But I still ended up with something crazy, like 10 pounds of seeds off this. So I obviously didn't need that many to carry forward. And when you're doing selection work, then the last year's seeds become a little bit redundant. Like you can save a few of them to be able to have all genetics in case you select out something that you want. But basically, you don't need 10 pounds of seeds in storage if you're advancing that variety forward. So that was kind of like the trigger to start doing the community seed selection. So I basically reached out to our networks and said, hey, I'd love to send everyone a packet of seeds of this variety. My aim is to select for the palest pod possible. Who wants to grow out a packet's worth, pick the palest pod and send it back to me. And I had so many people interested. In the end, I sent out 260 packets of seeds to all of these people. There were plenty more that wanted them. I just ran out of resources to do it. So True Seed sponsoring this, but they also sponsored the community seed selection project, which was really nice with them. So they gave me some money to pay for the postage and the packaging. We made these cool little color spectrum cards. So it was pretty fun. And seeds went all over the place. And then we tied this seed selection project with like an educational platform as well, because I've been teaching seed saving for years and years. And I often think like all those presentations I've given on seed saving, I wonder how many of those people are actually saving seeds. Like how much change has that educational outreach done when it's just an hour and a half at a conference or in a presentation? Like have we actually changed anything? And this was an opportunity to kind of teach the same material, but in a really hands-on process. So basically we did guided education throughout the whole season. We did a monthly video update from the field with education, and supported people like every step of the way, which was really fun. So you can see some of these, like we did seeding and transplanting, we did isolation and color selection, we did seed saving. We just covered all the topics at every step of the way, to help people be successful in the project. We had a community Facebook group, which is active. So if you're interested in kind of engaging with this, then that's the URL for this Facebook group. And it's a growing group of people that are all interested in this work. And the really fun thing was people were sharing photographs of their plants, the pale pods as they was coming. They were asking questions. People started supporting other people with their questions. So this kind of like decentralized education took root a little bit. So it wasn't just me going outwards. It became more of a web of people supporting each other, which I really appreciated. And we're at about 300 people in this group, but it still seems to be a great group of people talking about their plants and engaging with this work of not just seed saving, but actively selecting for a desired outcome, which is the important component of this. And then, Instagram and social media, these are some of the examples of people posting their updates. So everyone was kind of like inspired by everybody else, which was pretty exciting. And then towards the end of the season, we're collecting in feedback from people and photographs of their pods. And over the last few weeks, I've been getting packages in the mail each day with people's seeds. So they're sending a small packet of seeds back from their palest isolated pods. And these are the pictures of some of them coming in. So I can then match up the seeds with the photographs and put together the palest of the palest population of seeds to advance towards my goal of having Whidby White being the palest okra pod possible. So it's just been this, real beautiful journey of people and community and education and seed saving. And quite early on, I realized that this was a model that could be replicated easily by other organizations and also continued ourselves. And we actually went, even as the okra was winding down, we went straight into a collard community seed selection project. So we're already in phase 2, and phase 2 is where this kind of regional adaptation component is much more important to me. So I did a 21 collard variety trial, and they all intercrossed, and I had a very mixed up set of seeds, and I again had way more than I needed, and so it was very natural to put them in packets and send them out to people. This time round, I collaborated with Seed Expo. Oh, that's wrong. Southern Exposure Seed Exchange and Working Food to distribute the seeds. So they packaged and distributed them for me, and now we have over 350 people again across the country growing this ultra cross collard, which is intermix of all the 21 varieties. And our selection goal for this one is the most cold hardy, beautifully diverse, and delicious collard mix we can achieve, because these seeds were all saved from winter survivors. So they're all collards that survived 8 Fahrenheit. And we want to get a collard population that can survive the absolute coldest temperatures while also being absolutely beautiful in their kind of interpopulation diversity. So it's almost taking us towards a landracey type concept, in that if we keep selecting for these things, then we're going to have a very genetically diverse mix, as opposed to the Whidby White, which was actually trying to narrow to something very specific. The collards we want to keep much broader and encourage this concept of seed selection, seed saving, and regional adaptation. So I'm happy to kind of talk more about that with people. If there's organizations that are like, I want to do this, and you, myself with my own community, then we can talk about that. I'm more than happy to collaborate or share resources. So that's kind of like the overview of that material. I'm gonna stop speaking and open up to some questions, but just 2 final slides, which again you can go back to. We've got a Patreon platform for supporters, and then you can join our network, so you can find all this information via our website. But this is the link that you would want at the bottom. The slide link is just bit.ly/seed selection. And that'll give you online access to this whole presentation, so you can go back and follow up on any of those references or links to find more information. But it's also got contact information from me, so if you want to reach out and ask questions or follow up on any of these things, then I'm always happy to talk. Thank you so much. I guess we're going to go back to Angie, who might have some questions for me. Hey. Angie, I'm going to leave this up just for a second if people are copying down details, but do you want to shout?
Unfortunately, both of us are blocking most of that link there, but we can drop it. I'll drop it in the chat here.
Cool, thank you.
If anybody has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat box, and we will we'll get to them.
I'm already thinking about community seed selection 3.0. I've got and Angie, you actually started this off. I've got the I always say it wrong, Appalachian white-capped.
Oh yeah.
Or is it the Blue Ridge white-capped?
Blue Ridge white-capped.
Oh yeah, Blue Ridge white. I've got Blue Ridge white-capped corn that Angie pulled out of the USDA gene bank a good few years ago and had me grow out 3 or 4 years ago, and it was very diverse in that I had a lot of different types of cobs and plant sizes, but the best of the best were these huge cobs that were absolutely stunning and beautiful. And so I've been doing the same thing. I've been selecting the ones I want and ditching the ones I don't. It's taking some time, and I'm thinking that next year I might do a community seed selection on the corn and send out packets of corn to everybody and have people do their own selections on the biggest, most impressive. It's like up to like 32 row corn or something like that. It's really cool.
32 is just like gigantic. I can't get over it. It's just so fun.
It's really crazy. Yeah.
Well, I think, something that, struck me as interesting while you were talking was that I think the potential for communities to do like sort of community-wide seed selection and, to sort of breed their own land races that are, great for their microclimates, I think is really exciting, especially as climate change continues to plow forward. I think that's something that, more and more communities should be aware as an option. And that could be great projects, and definitely would be fun to get kids involved in and stuff too.
Yeah, and I guess that's one thing I want to, or try to get across, is it's really accessible and easy. In fact, the collard project, it was easier to do the mass crossing and selection and totally diverse mix than it was to actually save seeds from the collards individually, because they all outcross, and it would have been really hard to isolate all those varieties, and all the kind of technical seed saving stuff to keep a variety pure when it comes to collards is quite challenging. But just to let them overwinter, flower, and intercross, and then every year, cut out the plants that you don't want and let the plants that you do want cross, it's much easier than saving for pure seed. So it's almost like lazy seed saving. I feel a bit guilty about it being a special thing, because it's not. It's just letting the plants do what they want to do, and then we make those selections for what we want. And it's like working together with the plants in a way that everyone's happy.
Yeah.
Can I stop sharing now? Do you want?
Yeah. Why don't you stop sharing and I'll. Yeah. So let's see. We have a question. Mike Hansen would like to know where he can find sources of tubers and seeds specifically for, some of the odd things you were talking about, like the chayote and yacon and taro.
Yeah. So if you're able to, it's always better to source locally if you're able to find any local farmers. So we've got a Hmong community just outside of Asheville that are growing some really interesting stuff, and we've just kind of made connections with them, and that's where some of our stuff came from. A lot of our stuff came from
what community?
Hmong, like Vietnamese, Laos community. It's the Lee Fortune family farm are like the head of that community, but there's a lot going on there. We do source some of our material from Florida, where it's like grown tropically, and then we're learning how to grow it regionally. So there's kind of like a learning process that we're going through. If it's a specific question, like I want to get some of the chayote that you're growing, then reach out to me. And if we have surplus, we're happy to share. We have a formal sharing process through our Patreon platform. And then generally, if I've got surplus, then I'm more than happy to share stuff, especially, seeds is easy because you get so many of them when you start seed saving. Some of the tubers depends on what we've got going, but I'm always happy to help. Some people are sourcing from, Asian markets and that type of thing. I don't necessarily always think that's a great idea, because you don't know where they've been grown and what potential. Like chayote, there's been some issues with imported chayote carrying viruses, and then when people have grown them, they've taken out local populations of chayote. So you got to be a little bit cautious about that type of thing. So a known grower is best, and as close to where you are is better.
And Cultivariable has a few things too.
That's
right?
a good point. Yeah. Cultivariable is a great resource for a lot of the Andean root crops. There's going to be so he's growing in Pacific Northwest, and then you can get your source material from him and grow it in this region. So sometimes it takes a few years to then do that adaptation to the Southeast. But certainly, yeah, that's a great resource.
Okay. This one is a little off kilter, but it's interesting. Laura wants to know if anyone has heard of Ruby Wallace white cucumbers. She thinks they're native to Dallas, North Carolina, and hasn't been able to find any. Laura, have you checked the Seed Savers Exchange yearbook? And I think
check the USDA as well.
The USDA Germplasm Bank. That could be a good place to find it as well.
I've not personally heard of that one, but you should go to Angie's seed swap meeting.
Oh, yeah, we got a seed swap that is happening on, was it Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday at 5 o'clock, we have a virtual seeds swap with myself and Lee Barnes, who runs the Southern Seed and Plant Exchange. And it will be a place where we can kind of talk about different varieties and help each other source them if we can't, if we don't have them ourselves, and answer questions about seed saving and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, we're right about at time. Any other questions for Chris?
I'm on this platform as well, so you can always message me on the fancy CFSA platform.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Chris. That was really awesome. And I, thank you so much. I hope this inspires people to, contact you and become a part of the community seed selection, because I think it's really important as we go forward.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Take care.